Hi, I'm WCBS Business News reporter Joe Connolly with economist Paul Sheard on a topic that permeates all of our lives: money. Paul is the author of The Power of Money, and he has the ability to explain money and finance in plain English. He's known for that. He speaks at conferences around the world, and Paul is here to help business owners to better understand this economy. Paul, first of all, is there any hope that inflation, meaning costs to business owners, is going to come down further anytime soon?
I think there is hope of that, Joe, and thank you very much for having me on your show. That is the job of the Fed, and the Fed is hard at work raising interest rates. They've taken a little bit of a pause recently, but their job is, and they're single-mindedly focused on this, is to bring down inflation, the rate of inflation, which at one point was running about 8%. Now the CPI is about 4%. So yes, it is coming down, but this is like moving a super tanker. It's not that easy to bring inflation down that quickly. It's really a long-term process, but definitely headed in the right direction.
It seems like the decline has stalled. I wonder why.
I don't think it's really stalled. I mean, monetary policy is a tricky business. There's a famous statement by Milton Friedman that monetary policy works with long and varying lags. What that means is the central bank can start hiking interest rates, but that doesn't necessarily have an immediate effect on inflation. It will take it, a few months. Now, the Fed has delivered 500 basis points. That's like 5% of interest rate hikes to the economy. So there's quite a lot of tightening in the system. But it is taking its time to work through. But I think inflation, if you look at the numbers, is steadily coming down. It doesn't mean that prices are falling. It means that the rate of price increases is moderating. And I think that
That's the key point. Because I keep with commodities coming down, I keep waiting to see it in the supermarket, and I don't see it. Tell us again what that is.
Yeah, well, this is another sort of trap for the unwary, Joe, that when the Fed is trying to control inflation, it's trying to control an index, a kind of basket of prices right across the economy. And some prices could be going up or down, sideways, you name it. What they're looking at is kind of the average of that. And so when you go to the supermarket, you might see certain products that you're used to buying, could be fresh food, for example, or the price of eggs seems to be going up by 50 or 60%. And you say, well, what's this mean? The inflation's not 3% or 4%, it's 50%. But that's not the way that statisticians measure things. And it's not the way that the Fed reacts to inflation in the economy. It's a much more broad-based concept. But it's the rate of increase, not the... So prices are not necessarily going to come down. They're just going to stop rising at such a rapid rate.
And prices to business owners are costs. Do you think that prices will ever get back to where they were in 2000?
Well, again, in terms of wage levels or the cost of inputs that companies might be using, typically those costs over time will be increasing. But it depends. For example, if you're talking about computers, because of technological innovation, typically computers, telecommunication equipment, those prices have been coming down. But if we're looking at wages in particular, wages typically will be trending up, usually 2-3% or so per year. So businesses really kind of have to factor that into the equation. But the overall price level, if you like, the average of all the prices in the economy, that is very unlikely to come down. It's always going to be heading up gently. And that's actually what the government and the Federal Reserve want. They want a little bit of mild inflation, 2%, to kind of grease the wheels of the economy.
But for business owners, those costs are reflected in salaries. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of business owners are having trouble paying what people want. I wonder how that is going to work out.
Well, that's a very tricky part of the equation, Joe, because if we look at the inflation that's hit the US economy, in fact, worldwide, since the COVID recovery, it's really been driven by a labor shortage. A lot of people left the workforce as a result of the COVID lockdowns and the whole COVID experience, and they're not coming back to the levels that we saw before. So labor is in a shortage. And that means that companies do have to start sort of bidding against one another to get labor. So unfortunately, again, wages are not going to be coming down. If anything, they're going to be going up. But hopefully, the best cure for high prices is high prices. Same with wages. As wages do get a bit stuck higher, hopefully more people will come back into the workforce. But if I was a small business owner and I was having trouble with this, I'd be looking around at my own network and trying to figure out if there's somebody there, a niece or a nephew or somebody, a grandfather that retired early, that would be willing to come back and come back into the workforce, because that is the big macro problem that the US economy faces.
I met a woman yesterday who's gone back to work in her husband's business because he can't find employees either with the qualifications that he wants, or he can't pay them the salary that they want. The woman has gone back to work to get through that. We've heard a number of stories like that.
To give you a macro number, Joe, I mean, there's about 5 million workers have kind of disappeared from the US workforce. And to give you another number, there's a job openings. If you look at what are the level of job openings out there at any point in time, pre-COVID, that ran about 6 to 7 million people. Now it's running about 10 million. And if we want to talk about a statistic that is sort of sticky and not coming down, it is that number.
You mentioned the saying that the cure to high prices is high prices. And I suspect that a lot of businesses, small and large, especially large, maybe the big ones, are charging as much as they absolutely can until they can no longer get away with it, even if it means sacrificing volume. So the numbers are pretty good. So there's little incentive for companies to bring down business so far. Is that right?
Well, in a sense, that's kind of the theory of pricing. Companies will price their goods at whatever the price is that they can get away with, that in a sense will bring in the most profits. And of course, that doesn't mean higher prices, because if they jack up prices too much, they'll find they'll have fewer customers buying their product. So they typically are looking for the sweet spot where they can perhaps exercise, and we're talking larger companies here, a little bit of market power, get a little bit more revenue in the door without losing their important customers. But if we're talking small businesses, Joe, small businesses don't have really any market power. They're operating in a very competitive market. And so, they have to just go with the general trends in the economy. If they can raise their prices in this inflationary environment because their costs are going up, they really should do that. But they don't want to be the only one to do it, because if they do, they start to lose their business and it goes to the business down the next block.
How should business owners assess how much they should borrow?
Well, I think I think each business owner would have a good handle on that. But essentially, you want to look at your cash flow and your ability to service the debt. At the end of the day, that's the most important thing. Obviously, if you borrow, you're able to finance more business expansion. But if you take on too much debt and interest rates go up, then you are going to be stuck with a very tricky situation where your cash flows are draining all of your borrowing costs, your repayment, your interest rate burden is really absorbing too much of your cash flow.
I've heard it said that business owners sometimes think they went out of business or had to close down because of some event, such as COVID or whatever, something less drastic than that too. But some believe that they actually say that's why they had to close the business, whereas actually it was some fundamental decision that they made a couple of years earlier that turned out to be wrong. And this was just the result a couple of years down the road. Does that theory make sense from what you've seen?
Well, I think it does. I mean, there are a number of, on the gloomy topic of going out of business, there are a number of the things that can drive that. I mean, one is, you mentioned the COVID shock. I mean, the economy was, substantially shut down for an extended period. That was a very, very challenging situation for businesses, and many businesses packed up because of that. You then have more general fluctuations in the economy. Well, the Fed is trying to smooth them out. But you go into a recession for no fault of the business, they can again run into really trouble. Then you have technological change, and really very challenging environment for businesses these days. We're hearing about artificial intelligence all the time, business services moving to the cloud, etc. That's all sort of great for the aggregate economy, for sort of human progress. But if you're a small business and you've sort of stuck with an old technology, that can be your undoing as well. So the decisions there might be, at what point do you adopt new technologies, or do you stick with your old way of doing things? But running a business is not for the faint-hearted.
That's the key point too, and I'd like to mention now and then the point that Bill Aulett of MIT has made when we've interviewed him. He's the head of entrepreneurship at MIT. We were asking him how soon a business owner who's busy with many things has to adapt to new technology coming in. And Bill says within a year or two at the most. And if you don't, you're not going to catch up.
Yeah, I think that, well, that may be true, and in some cases may even be less. It is a rapidly changing environment out there, but by the same token, there's a lot of tools now, like open source tools on the internet, where businesses, actually small businesses, can sometimes be at an advantage to big businesses because they're not locked into big legacy systems. And so you often hear people who start up new businesses, everything's outsourced. Software, some is off the internet, some is just tapping into cloud services from various providers. But the small business owner, in terms of tapping into technology now, has got a lot more kind of optionality and choices at their disposal. They do need the capacity to navigate that landscape, but you don't have to do it all yourself.
Just a couple of other questions, Paul. It's interesting to talk economics with you in an understandable way. What do you suspect is the gap in many business owners' knowledge of finance and economics?
Well, perhaps one that would come to me is, because I've just written this book on the power of money, is understanding sort of how money does actually come into the economy. It's a slightly complicated story, but it is much misunderstood. And the kind of basically two avenues by which money comes into the economy. One is through bank lending to businesses and individuals. And we often think of banks having to sort of find deposits, collect deposits, and then lend them to people. But actually, that's not how it works. Banks actually create the money when they make the loan. Now, that money then circulates in the economy. The second sort of misunderstanding, and it's not just of relevance, I guess, to small business, is that government deficits, they get a bit of a bad name, and particularly people worrying about the stock of debt and repaying it and our grandchildren having all this burden, etc. But a government's running a certain level of budget deficit basically means they're injecting more money into the economy than they're taking out. And that's another source of money flows into the economy. So, I'm a little bit more sympathetic, if you like, to the idea that governments running budget deficits is actually not such a bad thing.
Because it's generating more money in the economy.
The money, yes, exactly. Money has to get into the system. I mean, obviously, again, if you're a small business owner, money's coming in the door, money's going out of the door. If that money didn't exist to begin with and find its way into the economy somehow, I mean, we all be back in a kind of barter economy. And that's the sort of surprising thing. So how does that money come into existence in the first place? And my book sort of lays out exactly the process, but it's basically banks making loans and governments spending more than they're taking in taxes.
What do you think the future of the economy is for the next year or so for business owners of small and mid-sized businesses especially?
Well, hopefully it will be a continued recovery, but there is a risk that pretty much every economist worries about, which is that the economy might tip into a recession. Now, the Fed is obviously not trying to do that. It's trying to bring down inflation, but it's trying to bring down inflation by restraining demand in the economy. The good news is the economy is really operating from a position of strength. I mentioned that labor shortage, for example, and demand is strong relative to the supply capacity. But the economy, I think, if the Fed is successful, will have a bit of a soft landing. but there is a bit of a concern out there that it might tip over into a mild recession. Again, the good news, Joe, is if every economist and market participant is expecting a recession, you're not going to get one. Recessions really happen when people are not expecting them.
Okay, that's good news to end on. Paul Sheard's new book, The Power of Money, is a Wall Street Journal bestseller. It is recommended by the Financial Times. It's published by Matt Holt Books. And reviews say The Power of Money provides a foundation of knowledge to help you feel better informed and more confident. And that is right in line with our mission here, too. So, Paul, thank you for talking with us, and congratulations on writing The Power of Money. More power to you.
Thank you very much, Joe. It was a pleasure.